And hello, welcome everybody. This is a Monday. This is part of our daily webinars, part of the Hispanic Star in Action campaign that has pivoted to help Hispanics that have been dealing with the impact of COVID-19 today and the now and the near, and also in a way to try to coordinate and be ready to have a recovery plan so that we together, united Hispanics, can get together and like and be able to mitigate the incredible impact that this global pandemic is having in the entire world, particularly in our community. And in this time of crisis, it is important, very, very important, to understand our brain and how our activity responds in situations like this. And for that, I'm super pleased to welcome today Ariadne Platero, who's a family therapist, licensed social worker, and a founding partner of Family Central Consultants. Ariadne is going to be sharing her expertise on how best to cope, how to manage our stress, and how to improve our relationships during these unprecedented times. Ariadne, I'm so grateful for you to join us. Thank you so, so much. I was mentioning to you before that COVID-19 has an incredible, is affecting disproportionately Hispanics, our Hispanic community in America, not only on our health, because we are, like unprotected. We're in many situations where the people that still work, that is still out there delivering packages, we're still out there working because we cannot afford not to. We're affected economically today, very, very stressed in terms of like losing our income from one day to the other. The contracts are going, the more that the economy is shut down and locked down, the more that I can see small businesses, entrepreneurs, and independent workers from all industries being affected. We are under stress. Tell us a little bit about how to make sense. How does the brain work? How does it work when you're in a stress situation? How does that work, and how can we actually learn about it so that we can cope with it better?
Thank you, Claudia. I think that that's a really good question, in that this is something that affects us in day-to-day life throughout our lives, but particularly in this time of crisis. The stress factor is really goes through the roof for a lot of people. So I think what's often helpful and what I like to do with clients is really talk through the physiological details of what is actually going on in the brain so that people don't get so frustrated with themselves. And I think that by understanding what is going on physiologically, it really helps people to then sort of forgive themselves when they are feeling sort of stressed, but also then to think about what are the ways to bring it down. So let's start with the physiological piece of it, where we basically, as humans, all people have these two different levels of emotions. We have the basic primary emotions, which are anger, fear, sadness, and joy. And we have then a more sophisticated level of emotions, which are much more what we like to access in our daily life. And basically, every day we take in a huge number of inputs, what people are telling us, what we're seeing, and we're translating them often without even being conscious of it. But so when we're doing that in a calm way, when our stress levels are down and our cortisol levels are calm, the sensory input that we get goes via what we call our frontal cortex, which is literally in the frontal lobes at the front of your brain. And this is the more sophisticated part of your brain. And it often leads to, therefore, more nuanced and subtle responses. We're calm, it goes through this area. What happens in this area of the brain? It's what we call our executive functioning headquarters. It has inhibition, response inhibition. It has our emotional control. It allows us to have sustained attention. It allows us to be flexible, to be persistent, to plan well, to organize well. All those things that are so valuable for us in daily life, whether in work or with our families. And it allows us ultimately to have the sort of higher thinking of having a perspective, and what we call a kind of metacognition, which is really the ability to put things in perspective and to react calmly. So that's where we, of course, want to be. And in calm times, that's where we are. When stress is high, when stress has gone up and your cortisol levels have gone up, what you end up doing is bypassing, you literally bypass your frontal cortex, and you go, your input, what you're seeing and what you're hearing goes directly through your amygdala, which is really the much more basic part of the brain. It's a much older part of the brain from, earlier in our development. And it's very much what we call the response, fight and flight response part of the brain. So when we're flooded with emotion, sensory input bypasses the frontal cortex and goes directly into the amygdala. What happens when that happens is that we then have what we call an instant emotional reaction. So we're not thinking about what was said. We're not saying, well, I'm talking to somebody that I really care about. I'm going to calm down, even though I'm feeling worried about that. Instead, we often have what we call a fight or flight response, which is a very kind of reactive pushback response to things. We either try and avoid them, we shut down, or we are we can often be more aggressive than we would intend to be. We often have harsh and kind of crude, more primary emotions. So when we're flooded, this is sort of what happens, and we take the input so fast we really don't process them with all our higher capabilities. So how do we cope with that? It's really what you have to do is to, what I say we all have to do, and we're all practicing every day in our ordinary lives, but becomes particularly difficult in times of stress, is we need to slow things down. We need to slow things down, and what I'm happy to report is one of the easiest ways to do that is to take a deep breath. And the research shows that your cortisol levels, which is the sort of chemical that will become very high under moments of stress, that the cortisol levels come down very sharply in just 3 deep breaths. So I know that sounds very simplistic, but the reality is, if you're doing this deep breathing method, inevitably it will bring down your kind of whole parasympathetic system, and your whole response will be calmer and more sophisticated in your responses, which allows you to be thoughtful of the reaction that you will be creating in other people.
But can I ask, so what you're saying, and I just want to make sure that at the graphic level, we understand that this is at the chemical level, this is physiological, this is at the brain level. What happens when you're confronted in a normal situation, what you were saying is whatever input comes into your brain and comes through the cortex, which is the executive presence, the intelligent side of the brain, the one that is able to discern, that has judgment, and that is able to take decisions and see right or wrong and have a value. When we are stressed, unfortunately, the input doesn't go the same way, it doesn't operate that, it takes a shortcut and goes straight to the amygdala, which is where you get the emotional reactions. And so by definition, it's not anything wrong with us. It's at the chemical level, there's a bypass that you can stop if you breathe deeply. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, essentially. I mean, breathing deeply isn't, the only response, but that is exactly what I'm saying, Claudia. What you have to do is to interrupt what is going on. When you're flooding, which is what we call when you've just dropped from your frontal cortex into the other pieces, basically you're flooding. And most people can probably recognize when that's happening because of some physiological response. You get tightened knots in your stomach. You may find you're incredibly, tensed up. You may find that, you're incredibly hot. There are various ways that people can work out when they're getting towards that. And the advice that is always given is that what you need to do is literally interrupt your interaction. So if you're hearing from somebody, just ask them to take a break. You want to be able to go away and calm yourself down physiologically, and that will then allow your brain to access the more sophisticated frontal cortex. I mean, essentially under stress we get into this tunnel thinking where you get the high cortisol, but you get a narrow bandwidth. You can only think about very small amounts of things, and it is, as you say, physiologically what's happening, and it's happening to all of us. So what we're encouraging, what I encourage, with everybody, with my clients that I work with, is that they become aware of when that is happening to them and start to interrupt the interaction and say, I need to take a break. I'm going to come back to this because you'll respond much better. But also the ways of soothing yourself is deep breathing. For some people, it's taking a walk. It's absenting yourself from the situation, not to leave it full time. You can't then not engage with whatever the issue is. But coming back after 15 or 20 minutes will transform the kind of response that you'll have, whether it's in the workplace with somebody that you're working with, either a colleague or a boss or somebody who works for you, or whether it's at home, with your spouse, with your kids, with your parents. Right. It works the same in every way.
And for everyone that is listening to this conversation, these are 20-minute webinar. We're going to listen from Ariadne Platero for a little bit more. If you have any questions, you can raise them on the chat or ask to share that with your voice. What I would like to understand a little bit more is how it is very important to be aware of the process so that there is no judgment and there is no value attached to when we react emotionally. This is a brain chemical reaction. The more you know about it, the more aware you are, the easier it is to stop it and interrupt it, correct?
That is exactly right. Because if you're aware when it's coming at the early stages, I think all of us have probably had, hopefully not too many times in our life, but many people, find themselves getting to a place where they really are not in control of their responses. So what I would say to you about that is there is always a moment when you are still in control. So there may be that moment where you're so fearful, you're so upset, you're so angry that you're very reactive. So if instead you can think about that situation and I always talk about it, freeze framing. It's like going backward in a video until you find that there's a point when you were aware that you were getting upset and you were still fully in control of your response.
How do we identify that? How do we help our community? Right now, there's, we're home, we're stressed, we're anxious, we don't know whether, like my mother has a fever, whether there's so many points of anxiety. How do we identify so that we can cut in that moment, like the process? What are the symptoms? How do we identify that? And how do we transform that into avoiding conflict, particularly, like if you have any recommendations or tips where to feel it, how to identify it, how to control it, and also how to avoid elevating that into conflict.
Right. Yes, a very good question. I think, as I say, physiologically is where you're going to feel it in your body. Most people will have a bodily response to an increase in stress, but a bodily response that they can recognize. Often the increase in stress, as you say, is chemical. And so that's something that's going on, in our internal systems. But I think that most people, if you take any situation, don't wait for, the most stressful situation or the time you reacted the most, any point of reaction. If you have a moment of reflection afterwards, think about the situation and keep going back until you recognize that point where you were aware that you were getting upset, but you were still fully in control of what was going to come out of your mouth, or the tone in which you were going to speak. And so the hope is, once you've understood that, for me, maybe it's my shoulders are going up, for somebody else their stomach gets tight, then as you go through your day, notice when that is beginning to happen. And when that begins to happen, you will understand, once you've made up, that's when my stress is going up, that's when I'm going to react or overreact to a situation. Or maybe it's not even overreaction, but it's a reaction that isn't helpful to the situation or isn't helpful to the person with you. So at that point, as you're going through your day and that all this input, and as you say, worries about our family, worries about our job, our income, the health and financial worries are absolutely enormous right now. And I think that what we want to be aware of is how that's building up. And then before it gets to that stage where we're no longer in control, that is where what I would suggest is that we start really thinking about the kind of conflict management. How do we both deal with ourselves and also recognize it in other people? Right. Within families, I often talk about tag teams. It's like, if you know that you can see somebody getting upset or you see yourself getting upset, where you're going to have like a pre-arranged signal, or where you're going to tap them and say, I think I need to.
Your audio is breaking up.
You're not alone, you're with other people, you allow each other to take over and help you in that situation.
Right. So I do want to ask one more thing, and then, like, I think that your audio was breaking out a tiny bit. It might be your Wi-Fi, and if that is the case, then we should suppress the video to go on with your audio. But okay, what I understood really clearly is it's important for everyone to know the chemical reactions that happen at the brain level. There's no judgment, there's no value, it happens. Identify it so that you can interrupt it. Identify it in someone else so that you can interrupt it. Now, talk to us about techniques to cope with stress, techniques to improve our relationships in these times where we're going to be home. Talk to us about like what tips and techniques you have for people that are working from home and that again are, like are coping with a number of things, like at the same time, whether it's childcare or anxiety of health or like economic anxiety or all of those.
All of the above, exactly. I think that now we're a lot of us working in very small spaces. We're working, with families around us, or even if we're not working from home and we're outside, then we have obviously an increased anxiety about our health. I think that it's very important at this time to really work out what are your own ways and what are ways for people in your family and people you're working with. It's sort of what we call self-soothing. It's like, what is your way of remaining healthy? And then you need to prioritize that. For anybody who's ever flown in an aeroplane, there's always that piece where they say the oxygen mask falls down and you must put it on yourself before you put it on your child. And this is ever more true when we're really stressed, is that we really, if we are the parent, either taking care of our elderly parents or taking care of our kids, or if we're in the workplace with other people that we're working with, you have to take care of yourself. You have to work out, is my way of self-soothing, is it to meditate 20 minutes when I can find the time? Is it to exercise, even if it's just running in place if you don't have the space to exercise further outside? It's about having enough information of what's going on out there, but not too much. I know that the news is extremely overwhelming at times, and I know we need to know enough so that we can be as safe as we can in our daily lives. But I would really recommend against doing it too much. It's like, watch the news and then turn it off. Schedule time for fun. Schedule time for the things that you actually really enjoy. Those simple things in life that, of course, we should be doing every day, but the first things to go out the window when we're stressed and we start panicking about our families and our jobs and our finances and our health. And those are really the things I want people to return to, is self-soothe, work out within a family. What is your ways to do it? Is it a little bit of downtime? Is it together time? Is it, the time for fun with the kids? Is it the chance to read, meditate, exercise? But what I want you above all is to work out within your workplaces and within your families, is think about the positives and work on the shared meaning, so that you're not just looking at what the fearful things are, you're also thinking about the things that you can be grateful for, the things that for you in your life and in your family are the positives. Because the more that you can focus on those, the more that you will begin to start feeling actually better about the entire whole. I mean, inevitably we have what's called, a bias to, when things are going well, we actually are over optimistic, but when things go badly, our brain naturally is over pessimistic. And again, that's not our fault. That's just the way we're wired. And I want people to instead be aware of that and try and block it. We really can block some of our own thoughts if we focus on that, Claudia.
And in the last minute that we have, I want to ask you about relationships. As it happens, like many Latinas, I'm a working mother, and I've had always the sense of guilt of, like not being with my kids enough. And funnily enough, as anxious and as stressed as I am, this time with my family, quarantine, not leaving the home, has given me as a mother a bonding opportunity that I probably didn't have in like in the years of the life of my kids, since they they grew up from being toddlers. So talk to us in a minute about relationships. How do we, like, it's almost like tomar el cuerno or el toro por los cuernos, turn it around, turning tables. And what do you have, what advice do you have about how do we use this time to improve our relationships?
I think that's a wonderful focus to end on. And I would say that the rituals of connection are really the most important thing that we think about. Literally, in every minute of every day, how do we greet each other? How do we leave each other, even if we're just going from one room to another? Create some family rituals, small, in place, the way that you can do it, so that there's something that you can start to do every day. Maybe there are some that will be daily, some that will be weekly. If you've got children, involve them in the cooking, involve them in the house cleaning. Try and be as connected as possible, because that piece of the connection and the family ritual, which is a whole different sort of area where we have research showing what incredible positivity it can create. And that is the focus where you can really focus more on the positive, even though you have all these other concerns that are out there.
And that actually ends up pretty well with the philosophy of World Human, which is optimism actually makes you healthier and better, seeing the possible side of life. So I want to thank Ariadne Platero, family therapist, licensed social worker and founding partner of Family Central Consultants, for being with us today in these 20-minute daily webinars for the Hispanic community, so that we can be informed, educated, and entertained in this time of pandemics. Thank you so much, Ariadne.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Thank you for your wisdom.
I enjoyed being on. Thank you, Claudia.
Bye-bye.